off to the left, you can see this long figure, right? And that's our levels of organization for living things. And I'm going to talk us through them. All right. So the atom is the smallest and most fundamental unit of matter. Now, you may be like, hey, aren't there some things smaller than that, like quarks and stuff? Yes. And go take a physics class if you want to talk about those. In biology, we're gonna stop at atoms. All right. An atom consists of a nucleus surrounded by electrons. An atomic nucleus, not to be confused with a cellular nucleus, which we'll be talking about in chapter 3. All right, so that's our smallest level, atoms. Next are molecules. So a molecule is 2 or more atoms held together by some kind of chemical bond. We'll talk about those in more detail in chapter 2. Then macromolecules, macro means big, so big molecules. These are many atoms stuck together, and they form structures that we call monomers. And again, that's going to be chapter 2. We're going to look at the different types of monomers. The main ones for biological organisms, we're going to be talking about fats and proteins and DNA and carbohydrates. There are other things too, but those are the ones we're going to talk about for life. Okay. So molecules, macromolecules, can come together to form things like organelles. So organelles, small structures that exist inside the cell, and they perform specialized functions. One people usually think of as mitochondria, right? That's the powerhouse of the cell. Or the nucleus where we store our DNA. Now, cells, our next level up, they are going to be the smallest fundamental unit of a living organism. Okay, smallest of a living organism. All living things are made up of 1 or more cells. All right. We can classify organisms in two different categories, right? Based on the type of cell that they're made up of. So we've got prokaryotes, which are single-celled organisms that do not have membrane-bound nuclei or organelles surrounded by a membrane. Okay, and we'll get to talk about the difference between eukaryotes and prokaryotes in a lot more detail later. But prokaryotes, those are going to be your bacteria and your archaea. And you may be like, hey, Dr. Dye, I remember hearing one time that some prokaryotes have organelles. Okay, there are always exceptions, and there's some weird ones in archaea, and we'll talk about it later. But generally speaking, prokaryotes, no membrane-bound organelles. Now, eukaryotes, on the other hand, these are organisms with cells that do have a membrane-bound nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. Not all eukaryotes are multicellular. That's a common misconception that people tend to have early on. There are a great many single-celled eukaryotes out there. If you've heard the term protist or protozoa, those are all single-celled eukaryotes. And again, we'll talk about all of those a lot more later. Okay, so we're up to the living units, right? So cells can combine to make tissues. So obviously that's a multicellular organism if we're talking about multiple cells working together. So groups of similar cells that carry out the same function, those are tissues. Organs are collections of tissues grouped together based on a common function. So there are multiple types of tissues in your kidney, but they all coordinate and work together for the overall function of the organ. Okay, you can have organ systems where you have multiple organs working together. Your cardiovascular system is a good example of that, right? You've got heart, lungs, your veins and arteries, all of those working together for the same purpose. Now, once we have all our organ systems, we can now reach the organism level. So that's just an individual living entity. And some organisms, right, are single-celled, so we don't have organs and organ systems and all that in those. But if we're talking multicellular, that's the next level. All right. And now we can start reaching where we're talking about multiple individuals. So we've got a population is all the individuals of a species living within a specific area. A community is the set of populations inhabiting a particular area. So that's a community includes multiple different species that are all living in the same area together. An ecosystem is going to be all the living and non-living things in a particular area. So, it's going to include the dirt, the water, all of it, all the living and non-living. And then finally, we can reach the biosphere level, which is just the collection of all the ecosystems represented across the planet. And it's going to include, again, land, water, parts of the atmosphere, all of it.